There are the interest rates the Federal Reserve controls and a whole lot that it does not.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Progressive Insurance, offering small business owners protection for what they've worked hard to build with over 30 customizable coverages. Learn more at progressivecommercial.com. And by Yubico, makers of the YubiKey. YubiKey helps protect important digital applications and services. YubiKey, still undefeated, the original passkey. More at yubico.com.
From Marketplace, I'm Sabri Benishore, in for David Brancaccio. President Trump has been pushing the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, and he did so again yesterday when he paid an in-person visit to the Fed. Lower interest rates would save the government money, but so far the Federal Reserve has not determined that lower interest rates would be good for the economy. And one other detail, the Fed doesn't actually directly control the interest rates. The president is concerned about the rates on Treasury bills. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has that.
The Federal Reserve only controls short-term interest rates, specifically the rate banks charge each other for overnight loans. The fate of longer-term rates, that's in the hands of global investors. They're always looking to the future. If they think inflation is heading up, they're going to demand a higher interest rate on Treasury bonds as a cushion. Fed independence is important to them. They want to be sure the U.S. central bank is setting interest rates based on what's best for the economy and not lowering borrowing costs because that's what the president wants it to do. Now, interest rates for mortgages and car loans are closely linked to the rate on the 10-year Treasury bond. When that yield goes up, mortgages and car rates do too. Sometimes the Fed will cut rates and Treasury yields go up. This happened just last fall. The Fed lowered rates several times, most recently by a 0.25 percentage point in December. But by January, the 10-year Treasury yield was up to almost 5%, not what the Fed or the incoming President Trump wanted. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
Intel says it has laid off 15% of its workforce, as it had planned to do starting last quarter. It's also canceling plans for factories in Germany and Poland, slowed construction in a factory in Ohio. All right, let's do the numbers. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are all up in the 1 to 1/10% range. The yield on the 10-year Treasury is 4.4%.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Viking, exploring the world in comfort. With a fleet of small ships, Viking offers travel experiences for the thinking person. Discover more at Viking.com. And by This Old House Radio Hour podcast, answering listeners' DIY and renovation questions and diving into home design trends, available in podcast apps. And by Rubrik, dedicated to giving businesses the power to bounce back fast when cyber attacks target the cloud. More at Rubrik.com.
The Trump administration announced new trade arrangements with individual countries this week: Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines. The deals all involve new tariffs placed on goods from these countries, 19% for Indonesia and the Philippines, 15% for Japan. But meanwhile, the administration has also placed or is preparing to place import taxes not on countries, but specific goods worldwide: steel, aluminum, copper, with plans for pharmaceuticals and potentially semiconductors. Let's take a closer look with Doug Irwin, professor of economics at Dartmouth College. Good morning.
Hey, nice to be with you.
Under the current administration, there are two types of tariffs. There's the tariffs on goods from countries, specific countries, and then there's tariffs on industries. Do one or the other of those carry more economic consequences than the other?
I'm not sure they would be different in terms of their consequences, but their implications are very different depending on the industry or depending on where you're sourcing from. The administration is considering a 50% tariff on imported copper. So what's interesting about that is we get much of our copper from Peru, Chile, and Canada. We have free trade agreements with all of those countries. So the 50% tariff is across the board. It doesn't matter where you're importing copper from, but will hit those three countries in particular. Now, with the cross-country tariffs, so for example, we're considering duties against Lesotho at very high levels, and a lower duty on goods coming from South Africa. Well, if you're a textile producer in Lesotho, what you would probably want to do is just ship your goods to South Africa and then ship them to the U.S. To avoid the very high tariff on Lesotho goods, basically calling your goods South African goods.
The country-specific tariffs, the ones that we're about to get, they have been challenged in court, and the next court date on these, I believe, is July 31st. How real of a possibility is that those country-specific tariffs could go away or be diminished in some way because of, some legal ruling?
You're absolutely right. The reciprocal tariffs that were announced on April 2nd and have been paused, those have been challenged in courts. And in particular, the Court of International Trade, which is a special tribunal in New York City that just hears these very narrow cases on trade policy, they ruled unanimously against those reciprocal tariffs. Now, of course, that's being appealed, and it might even go to the Supreme Court. We don't know whether those tariffs will survive. But let me just contrast that just briefly with the industry tariffs. Those are usually under different statutes of the law that allow the president to raise tariffs on particular goods if there's, say, a national security justification for them, if those foreign products have been dumped or subsidized in their selling them to the U.S. And so those are on much firmer ground legally.
The goals of these tariffs are hard to pin down. Some days it's to raise revenue, some days it's to bring back production and jobs. How likely is it that we would reshore production of these industries and get a net gain of jobs?
In some cases, like copper, it's going to take years and years to make new investments in new mines to dig out the copper deep under the earth. So we might not see any jobs initially, but there might be plans for investments. Another factor here is that a lot of these industries are not going to bring back a lot of jobs if we stop imports because they're very capital intensive or they're very technology intensive. So to take steel, for example, today it's pretty much been automated and mechanized. Technology has taken over. So we can increase steel production in the U.S., but it's probably going to mean we're going to use existing plants and existing equipments or bring on new technology that won't create a lot of jobs per se when we increase output.
Doug Irwin is professor of economics at Dartmouth College. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Our executive producer is Nancy Fargali. Our digital team includes Antoinette Brock, Emily McCune, and Dylan Yettinen. Our engineers are Brian Allison and Rachel Breeze. And in New York, I'm Sabri Benishore, and you are listening to the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.